Hello, welcome to Tom's River Seaport Society's virtual book talk on Silent Maid, a catboat history with its author, Kent Mountford. Silent Maid sailed through the lives of 7 American families with varying goals and lifestyles. The history, lives, and environment of each is meticulously developed in this unusual book. In each life, this big catboat played an important role. Kent Mountford is an environmental scientist, sailor, historian, and author. He has written an exceptional book that is engaging on so many levels, a great historical reading. At the end of Dr. Mountford's talk will be a Q&A session where participants may unmute themselves to ask to join in. Without delay, the Tom's River Seaport Society now welcomes you, Dr. Mountford.
Thank you very much. This is a complicated book. It took 4 years out of my life and very interesting process. I hope you will enjoy a little bit of the story. It was a little hard to actually, decide what to actually include. And here we go. I was kind of foggy about how to pitch the lecture because of the complexity of the story. As Eric mentioned, there's 7 families over parts of 9 decades in this book, which runs about 300 pages and has about 400 illustrations and 4 years of me inside it. But I'll simplify and just talk about 2 people. I actually, before I say that, I start the book with some discussion about where Barnegat Bay came from, something about its meteorology, something about its geology, in order to understand the framework in which catboats fit so very well. So anyway, you get 2 partial stories in this connection. And the first one is that I have no picture of Edwin Shuttle, who's my first major character in the late 1800s. But this is his son, another Edwin, the next generation in the 1920s, on Silent Maid with his brother at the helm and their little kids' boat being towed back from a 4-day cruise down to Beach Haven in Silent Maid. Shuttle's father was a German immigrant paper box maker. He brought with him from Europe wonderful skills and wonderful inventiveness. And when he got his feet on the ground with his career, he was able to bring his family down to Tom's River and to Island Heights for a summer stay. An interesting, humorous story that's in the book. But the first thing that Edwin did, he learned how to sail. And he borrowed a sneak box from over on the Ocean Gate side of the river. And this was his first exposure to a catboat through one of the little Perrine sneak boxes. And when he reached his own majority, he had a lot of resources. He was very successful. And this is a picture of him in his halcyon years. If you look at his face, notice the little overlap of the eyelids that is diagnostic. That's a Shuttle characteristic, genetic, and you can recognize members of the family with that. This was a building for the Shuttle Paper Box Company, one of many box companies that Shuttle created, all kinds of things. If you buy in the supermarket today a pie with a celluloid window in the box, that actually was a Shuttle first introduction, maybe had a patent on it, but it was a development from his boxes. The building still exists, and it was sold in 2014. I was able to get pictures of it. And it still has the label of E.J. Shuttle and Company on the street number. Interesting man, interesting times. He, of course, grew up in a bay that was full of catboats. If you notice that second boat from the port hand in this picture, she has a flag number on her, or a sail number of 116. So you get some idea of how many catboats were in the fleet on Barnegat Bay. And also there were many commercial catboats, but they became increasingly sophisticated as the racing became more competitive. Silent Maid carried the symbol T82 because she was a boat that came out of the Tom's River Yacht Club. She was designed by a friend of Edwin Shuttle, a man named Francis Swiska. He also designed the 110 racing sailboat. And he worked in his early years for the Gardner yacht design firm in New York, and eventually had his own shop. And there's a lot about him in the book as well. He had good times and bad times. The Depression was very hard for him. He designed this. His original drawing came from Tom's River Seaport Society. And there are a number of the very valuable shuttle papers that are in the archives of the society. And she was built in 1924 at Morton Johnson's up in Bay Head. And centerboard boat, 30 inches of draft, 36-inch loaded, and built to handle an incredibly large sailing plan. This is his daughter, Mary Shuttle. And I often thought she was a really attractive gal. I could have dated a woman like that and been very happy, but she's a little older than me. Not a hell of a lot, but what can you say? She later married into the Mitchell family, and that family was extremely helpful in my creation of this book. Shuttle, amazingly, as a really kind of hard-nosed industrialist, was also a birder. And I found in some of the family notes, excuse me with that, that's not ready yet. We found a number of accounts of him going on birding expeditions. And he was apparently pretty good, because he said that one of his colleagues said, jibing one of his colleagues who was another guy. I think they went to look at the hawks at Cape May, something like that. And he said, "You're not really a good birder until you're as good as the skipper." And that was the name that the friends and whatnot gave to Edwin. There was a major disaster, not a shark disaster, and as shown here from Michael Capuza's book in the shark attacks in New Jersey in 1916. It was called the Great Depression. And this guy, Roger Babson, shown here in 1920, predicted the great 1929 stock market crash. And he was influential with Edwin Shuttle, and Shuttle managed to manipulate his resources and whatnot in advance of the crash, protected his businesses, and also protected his family's finances. He also was extremely generous to other paper makers during the years of the Great Depression, and thereby became very famous in the industry. He was one of the 12 major manufacturers in a council that governed paper manufacture. And he would actually farm work out to smaller firms in order to assure their survival. In the Second World War, he became an advisor to President Roosevelt and spent an awful lot of his time in the Philadelphia Navy Yard. Anyway, Shuttle had a family as well, and his brother, Mark Shuttle, moved to Bay Head during the hard years, and his wife and the sisters moved to Bay Head during the Second World War. Mark Shuttle married the mayor's daughter in Bay Head. And this is the list of cottages for 1918. I don't know Mr. Strickland, but he lived on Bridge Avenue. One of my early insights into the Shuttle family was with Edwin Shuttle, who was a nephew of Edwin's. And he lived in Bay Head and was introduced to me by people at the Bay Head Museum. Keep pushing that button. And Philip was wonderful in introducing me to the structure of the family. There were Ferdinand Shuttles in every generation, and there were Edwins in some generations. And it was very hard for me to figure this out, even with a family, a family tree history. But Philip was a wonderful guy, and he passed away about maybe a little more than a year ago. And I'm sorry I did not have more contact with him during his life. One of the sources of real intimate information on Edwin Shuttle, as I said, he was a pretty hard-nosed industrialist, apparently a pretty strict father, and there were some really, really hard times for his sons. The daughters were modestly treated, but he had a side to him which was extremely, extremely fine and extremely kind. I ended up, after years of talking to all the different sides of this, thinking that I would really have liked the man. He crewed on Ed Crabb's, Commodore Crabb of the Tom's River Yacht Club, his schooner yacht, Windjammer, on one of the Bermuda races in 1926. And this is the crew on that, and Shuttle kept a detailed logbook during the cruise, and it was created with many, things just glued to the page and whatnot, with all his personal notes handwritten. Very interesting insight into the man. And he was a loyal friend, trustworthy, and very respectful of people who had knowledge and intelligence. And he picked these guys very carefully as his friends, and many of them were his life friends. Excellent man. This is the stern of the ship. Shuttle is at the helm in this particular case, and just the man on the left in this case. Well, Shuttle and Swaiskuth shepherded the boat at Morton Johnson's through all her building, commissioning. They argued for weeks and argued over the dollar amount for the wheel for Silent Maid because it was slow in coming during the time when it was hard to get particular parts. She was, in final count, the largest catboat in Barnegat Bay. And from de Rouville's boatyard, I have this wonderful photograph of her in the head of a fleet of 8 boats. So she was an extremely fast vessel. The shuttles were the first of 7 families, as Eric mentioned, to own and sail Silent Maid. Picking my own, the next character in the book, as the 5th family, simply because I know it best of all the 7 families. But they were interesting families. They represent roots from all over the world and were really, really interesting people, all manner of persuasions, all manner of financial statuses, all manner of sport interests, very interesting people. There I am with my first square rig ship at some ridiculously young age. And in 1942, my father was a tool and die maker. He worked for Weston Electronics during the war, made aircraft instruments for the fighter pilots. And this was an uncle of mine, Clarence Meredith Leeds, probably related to the Leeds who were Barnegat pirates back in the American Revolution. He said he was always afraid to look into the family history. When I did, I found Jeremiah Leeds, who was a privateer. He worked as comptroller for Thiokol, a company that made actually early rocket fuels for the federal government. One of their experiments was a failure, and it became Thiokol caulk. It was this adhesive caulk that we all use on our teak decks, on hull seams in wooden boats, and that was a mistake in the manufacturing. But Chick was the first sailor in my family that was in my generation anyway. And I learned boating with a kayak that I got for 25 bucks in 1952. And I was a skinny kid. I could barely manage the kayak. It was too big for me. I eventually managed to do it. But I sold the kayak in terms when my parents bought the Silent Maid, the story of which follows. During the 50s, there was this whole family togetherness movement. This particular issue of Life magazine espoused that concept. Many journalists and whatnot did the same thing. Family that plays together stays together. So my parents had been married about, 1933 to 53. They were up toward their 25th anniversary. And look at the TV screen in the background. And they felt that they really needed something to bring the family together and make us a single unit rather than me going off and playing my games and them going off. Dad was a golfer, exquisite golfer, and my mother had her own circle of friends. But Osprey was the bridge to that because my uncle at Johnson Boatyard, where he kept the Osprey, their little catboat, was over on the left side of this picture. I think my cursor will come in there. This is the side along the Bayhead Manasquan Canal over on the left. And Silent Maid, Osprey was about here on the dock. So that's where I became a sailor, and Chick taught me how to sail. It was really a very good formative experience for me. This boat was for sale at the Bayhead Yacht Club, and it was owned by a guy named Cameron. He's the one who signed the papers, but really behind the whole thing was Jim Kellogg, who was a Bayhead resident, seat on the New York Stock Exchange, and he and his sons formed a company. They had a mission to save old and special boats in Barnegat Bay, and this was one of them. Well, we came up stumbling little family, first time in sailing a big boat, and we said we'd like to take it out for a ride. Can we do that? It was Grant Bauer was the broker. He was a Bayhead Yacht Club member, and also married one of the Johnson family people. And he said, okay, well, apparently he talked to Jim Kellogg, who enabled us the freedom to take this wonderful boat out. And we'd never sailed anything this big in our lives. We'd sailed a catboat, it was 21 feet, but 33 feet and 950 feet of sail is a hell of a lot different. So here, my uncle, dad, and mom, we got on board this boat and we backed her out of the slip and took her out untried to sea trial this huge catboat. Well, you know Barnegat Bay, many of you, I'm sure. In the afternoon in summer, this was in July, it blows up on Barnegat Bay. That sea wind comes in, drawn in by the warmth of the land. And we raised the sail 68 years ago next month. Up went this wonderful sail, original Schotel mainsail, incidentally, with the original T82 on there. We could never afford to buy a new kit sail for this. So we continued to mend it and nurse our way through it. So this innocent family was out there in 18, 20 knots of wind. We survived. It's a very interesting story. And we were sailing back up the bay downwind with this thing roaring along at about 10 knots. And we were roaring up and another vessel came by to windward. And the guy with an English accent hollered out, "What class are you?" And of course, we didn't know she was a B-class catboat at that point. And my uncle hollered out, "First class." And they swept on to windward of us and we went on back home. And Jimmy must have arranged a price for us. We bought the boat for something like $2,800, which was affordable for our family. And of course, we put many times that into the boat over many years. We had her for 12 seasons, and I grew up as an adult on that boat. Kellogg's bargain is only recognized decades later. We realized that he and his son really wanted to save these boats. And it turned out that Jimmy sold one catboat for a nickel. And the buyer at the end of it thought that he'd overpaid. Picture and story of the boat and her outboard motor and everything is in the book. And this isn't her; it's another boat on the bone pile back at Beaton's Boatyard in Manalogan. But the guy paid a nickel and he thought he'd overpaid. Her name was Pastime, if you ever read the book. So I grew up on Silent Maid from age maybe 12 or 13 till I was an adult, girlfriends, out of the Army, out of college, and working in the commercial world. But it was a wonderful place for a kid to grow up. My mother made all kinds of meals on that stove in the middle. There's a percolator coffee pot in there, and I can imagine in my mind that thing bubbling away in the mornings. We sailed from March to November every year. Stayed in as long as we could till the snow flew. Next was this wonderful Primus kerosene stove. I don't think anyone in my current generation, I should say, was familiar with these things. They were fired with alcohol first, and then you ease the pressurized kerosene into it, and it would begin to hiss at you. It made a good, strong flame, but it generated formaldehyde gas from the combustion of the chemicals. So we were breathing formaldehyde gas from this stove. And the toast was amazing. My mother had this little rack that sat on the burners, and it burned on one side. It was white bread on the other. And that smell is still with me a half century later. We, of course, in those days, marinas had no showers. And we showered on the deck of the boat. The yard we were at was Winter Yacht Basin. 100 stories about that as well. And a little bit more. I found this dinghy floating in Barnegat Bay in 1954. And I named her Wake because she followed Silent Maid many hundreds of miles. And this was wakeboarding in those days, without loudspeakers, without big engines, and without much wake. I also, as I grew up a little bit, I began to be able to shin up that mast in half a minute. Believe me, with a foul halyard block ashore or something going wrong with the spreader, was a valuable skill. Years later, when a friend of mine owned the boat, she said, "Ken, you climb that mast all the time. Why don't you go climb up for me? I got a problem. That starboard spreader's got blah, blah." So I climbed up and I thought I was going to die. I barely made it to the spreaders. This is after being in the Army and doing 10 pull-ups every meal. But I made it and I got down again. It was something of a miracle. But that was a good exercise for a skinny kid. And I really learned from that. And the view was marvelous. Look at the size of that cabin. Come on. Look at the size of that cabin. I mean, four people could live in that boat beautifully well. And when the boat was eventually restored as an exhibit for the Philadelphia Independent Seaport Museum, I get in that cabin and it's just like stepping back to my youth. It was really wonderful, and a wonderful mission to restore that boat. It was also a beginning for me of a 6-decade love affair with Island Beach. We sailed down to the west side of Island Beach many, many times. And I brought kids from college down and my girlfriends and business colleagues. And it was a wonderful experience for all of us. That's Judge Hartramp's shack. It's still preserved on the ocean beach. And what a wonderful place that was. I'm told in the 20s, when people were very formal around the seashore, that you'd walk into that shack and they'd all be sitting around the table playing cards with bow ties and white shirts on. So it was a mixture of formality and informality. Island Beach was wonderful for me, and Silent Maid brought me to that whole picture. At A14 on Island Beach, I took a fastener off this wreck that was exposed by a hurricane. And we used X-ray crystallography to look at the fittings just a couple of years ago. And it was Muntz metal, alloy developed to avoid corrosion and electrolysis. And it was invented in 1851. So the wreck couldn't be any earlier than 1851. It could have been a lot later. We never know. I learned a lot about the marine life in Barnegat Bay that really did me well. This is a lightning whelk from the deeper waters in Barnegat Bay. In Virginia, these are harvested commercially and sold. The meat is sold as conch, and you can find piles of them 3 feet high. But they were kind of a rarity in my years in Barnegat Bay. This is where I learned to snorkel. And that is me down there with that wonderful plaid bathing suit. This is what is today called Tice's Shoal, and you can sometimes find 300 boats there. And it's not what it was in the 1950s, when the people, at least at Forked River, called it Clearwater. And the water was always clear because it was close to Barnegat Bay, close to Barnegat Inlet. And there was a channel that came right in with the tide. So the water and the eelgrass and whatnot was beautifully clear. And I dove and saw scallops and crabs and toadfish and whatever have you. This is the famous Nemiopsis leidy, the luminescent comb jellies that you see behind your boat in the summertime. And if you got your propeller running, you can see these things popping out like flashes of light. Of course, they do not sting like the sea nettles do today. But there were wonderful organisms in Barnegat Bay. This is a red-beard spoge, Microciona prolifera. This one's 6 inches wide, and the photograph does not, it's a 50-year-old photograph, it does not show the beautiful brilliance of the color of this organism. Wonderful critter. I learned a great deal about the plankton. I ended up buying a microscope, and that became my career for about 4 decades. And this one in the middle, this little critter with the horns, for those of you who are boaters, this all started on Silent Maid, incidentally. That is the larvae of the barnacle. And he comes along and finds a place to land, and that's where barnacles come from on your boat. All started on Silent Maid. So it was stood that way for 44 years. And I wrote a book on Barnegat Bay, actually wrote it in college, and it was published through the Toms River, excuse me, not you guys, the Ocean County Historical Society in about 2002. And this, for some reason, got people interested in me. And I was invited to the launch of Gary Jobson and Roy Wilkins' wonderful book on the ACATs. And that was held at Ocean County College. And during that wonderful thing, they had standing roast of beef, and it was really just a wonderful affair. And all the people in North America were there, I think. James Kellogg's son, Peter Rittenhouse Kellogg, sidled up to me and he said, I'm going to buy the Silent Maid. This is Mary Shodel Mitchell, the girl that I found so attractive, leaning up against the hull of Island Beach as she was brought up aground on the side of a sandbar down near Barnegat Inlet. And this is her in her later years. She lived into the 1960s and actually lived well into years when I could have and should have met her. And she was a wonderful woman. She wrote an article in the Catboat Times. It's a newsletter put out by the Catboat Society. And it was one of my valuable references the insight of a family member who was on Silent Maid. And there are many stories that she contributed to the book. I also really emphasize again the value that Philip Alden Schodel was to me during the book. And this is the family genealogy that I had to work with. And it was really hard to keep the Ferdinands from generation to generation. And several members of the family corrected me as I went through this. And the book was actually published with an error in it as a result of me not understanding this whole thing. This is a complex family. Mark over here was the guy who moved to Bayhead and married the mayor. And this was Shuttle's wife himself, Sarah. And anyhow, sorry. Okay. Also of extreme value to me was Susie Mitchell, who lives in the old Shuttle Mansion on Island Heights, and her cousin, Sally Randall. Mitchell Davis, I'm sorry, she did marry as well. And they were extremely valuable to us. And of course, they were of the computer age, so they began to bring things up and they were able to put me in touch with family members as well. I also had 56 years at the time I wrote the book, and now 69 years of journals from my own sailboats, which included individual cruises on Silent Maid in detail, my memories written down within a day or so without any editing. So that was extremely valuable to me. And that's why the book has some riches in it. And this is my assistant who did years of exhausting research, and she's passed out here on the book. Wonderful little girl, and she passed away. Another little girl now fills our life as well. That's the story, and I'm delighted to answer any questions if those of you are interested. Eric, it's back to you.
Okay, if anybody has any questions for Dr. Mountford, you may unmute now and you'll be able to ask them.
I also have an email, kentmountford@gmail.com, and I'm delighted to correspond with people who have more stories on Silent Maid or find errors in the book. I think they've all gone to sleep, Eric. But no problem.
And if I may, it's Carl Shuttle.
Yes, hi, Carl.
I can.
Yes, you're the one who found one of my mistakes.
That's all right. I congratulate you on having the fortitude to work with the family and friends and former owners. And there was an awful lot of material that I know you had to sift through in this book.
Yes, indeed. I understand I surprised you with a few things too.
Oh, yes. Yep.
Well, all of you were delightful, and that included all the families. They were extremely forthcoming and fascinating to work with. It was truly a labor of love and 4 years well spent.
Well, thank you. I hope the book is widely read, well received.
We'd like it to be more widely received. We recently sent copies to all the historical societies in New Jersey and also to all the libraries in New Jersey. And Peter very generously offers into any library who checks out the book, he'll pay them $5 for every reader. Good to see you again, Carl. That's wonderful.
I'm on the coast of Maine, a little place called Brooklyn, Maine, which
I know that well. We sailed up there in the Victory Chimes.
Yep. Well, there's a lot of interest in.
Carl's left. Maine's a long way off. Maybe he'll come back.
And this is Sarah Shuttle. This is Carl's daughter.
Oh, wonderful. Hi.
Hello. I am not in Maine at the moment. I am down in the Philadelphia area, but I would just like to echo what my dad was saying. Thank you so much for doing all of this. I certainly learned a lot. I have only been on the Maid once or twice, but it was really interesting to learn about her history this way. So thank you.
Were you on the original Maid or the new Maid?
I believe I have been on one each. I think.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that, Sarah.
I think I've been on each one of them once.
Oh, that's good. That's wonderful.
Yep. So, but Dad is back.
Shortcoming of being on the coast of Maine, the internet went out for a minute.
Yes. A lightning strike, I'm sure.
Exactly.
Well, pleased to hear from Sarah as well. Another name that has jumped down through the generations. Continue to talk if anybody wants to. Carl, can you hear me?
I do hear you. Yes,
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to have some wisdom to share with me.
no, I just was going to say I have very fond memories when I was young of Barnegat Bay, but my parents sold their house in about 1954. So my fondest memories of Barnegat Bay are before that, when it was still pretty
Yes,
quiet.
like I remember
Yep.
very much.
No
Before the
cigarette
cigarette boats.
no cigarette boats. A lot of beautiful marshes to sail through and kind of
Yes,
get lost.
you could do that. That's correct. Mhm. You know, my first sailing experience with my father was in the marshes behind Lavalette and all the way down to Seaside. And we rented a boat, an old G sloop, in that series of estuarine thoroughfares and whatnot behind the island. And we got calmed, and that was my first sailing experience till the southerly came in. And then we had a sprightly sail back home to windward. But one of the marshes that were lost was up at Curtis Point, just on the south end of Mandaloking. And my college roommate and I in 1956 had a 15-foot sneak box. And we sailed one morning with a light breeze in those thoroughfares, and it was like flying. My friend George, who I just buried last week, was at the helm, and I stood up in the bow ahead of the mast on that little sneak box. And I watched the shadow of the boat go over these wonderful eelgrass beds. And it was like flying, and you see fish scurrying aside, crabs scurrying. And I was so moved by that experience. It stayed with me all these years. And I noticed that over on one side, on one of the marshes, there was some kind of heavy equipment working. And that was the beginning of the filling of all of those marshes to a depth where you could build high-end houses, and the filling and bulkheading of all those estuarian thoroughfares that were so rich environmentally. And to this day, of course, none of the people who live in those big houses, including some friends of my parents that are now probably long dead, none of them ever had that experience of sailing and feeling like they were flying in Barnegat Bay. Wild stuff.
You're absolutely not right. You didn't have to go down to the Phipps Estate or Ocean Beach State.
Yeah.
Pretty much most of that coastline was still quite wild.
Yes. The inner cover of the book, as Carl knows, was the 1924 chart from the federal government. And the back cover is what it is today. And you can flip between those two and see the tremendous destruction of the marshes and, the whole habitat itself. And people like my friends in the Save Barnegat Bay organization talk about preserving Barnegat Bay. It can never be restored to that. With actually, when I gave the other talk, there are now 1 million people to the west of Barnegat Bay in the summertime. And that's just appalling. Drive through Bricktown, where I saw cordwood being stacked in the pine woods, and there's none of that left. Forest fires maybe, but they put them out pretty quick.
Well, most of everything that was west of the bay was still dirt roads.
You bet. Sand roads.
Sand roads, exactly.
Sand roads and pineys.
Well, Mother Nature and the ocean may take take back a lot of that.
Well, they will. Hopefully not in my lifetime.
Exactly.
I just wanted to say hi quickly. It's fun to
Oh, Dan
see.
Crabb is there. Yes.
Can you guys see me, Katie?
I don't see Katie, but I see Dan Crabb. That's cool.
Oh, that's so funny. I wonder why I'm not showing up. Well, I
see
just
it.
wanted to say hi to all my shuttle relatives. This is like a little mini family reunion on here. I love it. My only experience on the Silent Maid was when we spread my father's ashes, Andy's shuttle, in Barnegat Bay on the Silent Maid, and that was really a special thing. And his,
Yes.
his
sorry I
hearse
didn't
was at the
meet
Bay Head
Andy.
Yacht Club, and that was very special. But that was my only time on the Maid. But I just wanted to say hello to everyone and thank you for putting this on. And I've learned a lot, and it's been really nice.
It's really great. Well, Dan Crabb down there had a birthday a couple days ago, right?
Correct. I'm probably the oldest one here. Matter of fact,
Maybe not. I'm 83 next month, so.
I'm 80. I was 84 yesterday.
Oh, just a boy almost.
Go
We're
on.
still in
Hear
competition.
more from you.
When's your next?
Yes,
Are you writing another book?
I am right now, and it's moving far too slowly. It's a history involved in Manasquan, and it uses our old family house, which was 100 years old when it was destroyed by Hurricane Sandy. It uses that as an icon around which I build the story. And it's similar in structure to the Silent Maid book because I talk about the environment, its history, its connection with the Revolutionary War and many other things, World War II and the blackouts during the war and the torpedoing that was done off the coast and on through the present with a lot of the memories of my own family in our house. Some interest from the Squan Village Historical Society, but I do not have a publisher to make this book come alive. I'm about 150 pages into it.
All right, good.
Keeps me out of trouble.
It's been a great presentation. I enjoyed it very much.
I'm delighted. That's really good. Sometimes you can't tell how these things work, Dan.
I'm
Well,
glad.
I honor the member of your memory of, was he your father or grandfather?
Edward
Commodore.
Crabb, grandfather. Commodore Crabb was my grandfather.
Yes. Yeah.
We still have the boathouse. They still have lots of pictures of that area. So.
Yes. You have a model, I believe, right? Windjammer?
Windjammer the model was built by Dave Beaton, and we have it here in our house in New
Oh,
Jersey.
that's wonderful. Yes.
Left it to my niece Sharp, who's married to Mark Beaton.
Uh-huh.
Dan?
Oh, I didn't know that. Yes, I know Mark very well. Oh, there comes Windjammer.
Yeah, that's
I
good.
have a small film of Silent Maid under sale, and that's probably the original Silent Maid, and that's probably the only film that exists of her under sale that I know of. So I don't know what to do with it. We originally talked about putting a CD in the book and having that video in there, but in a couple of years, no one will be able to play it. Probably most people can't now, but there wasn't very much of it, so there wasn't a hell of a lot to deal with. Well, delighted to meet all you guys. How many shuttles are on this place? Anyway, just two of you? Or three of you, I guess.
Four.
Four, wow.
More than
Hardly a
that.
man is now alive.
Jane
Wow.
Mitchell,
Yeah.
Susie
Did I-
Davis, Sally
Pardon?
Randolph.
Oh, really? Oh, that's wonderful. Sally was so good with the book. Yeah. And Susie, how's Susie doing?
She's on, I think. She's muted.
Oh, that's all right. Yeah. Wonderful home. Oh, she opened the home to us. And I learned get a feeling about the Shuttle family. It was really
Susie's
great.
doing fine.
That's
Susie's
very good.
on.
Wonderful.
No, Susie's on.
Where's the-
Excellent. That's really good.
Susie, where's your picture?
Hey, Dan, Charlie Davis.
Oh, Charlie. All
Hey,
right.
okay. Yes. The hunter.
I took the video off.
I noticed.
Okay. We don't want anybody to steal stuff from the house. They don't want anybody to see it.
There I am. I'm not at the house.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, our son's at the house.
Well, that's good. It keeps it alive. Are they the ones that I have a picture of sitting on the stove?
Those were the, yes, one of them.
Yeah,
Anyway,
amazing. That's how long it's been.
They can't-
15 attack dogs.
They can't hear.
Oh.
Yeah, no, that was one of them. Two of the girls were in that picture.
Uh-huh.
They're down there now.
Oh, that's wonderful.
They're both sailors and having fun.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's so good. Keeping it alive.
That's right.
Well, somebody needs to spur the somehow the exhibition or continued honoring of the original Silent Maid. The restoration that was done is really a nice job. And of course, the mast is a problem. What do you do? To lay it down next to the boat, I guess. We always described it as a telephone pole, and it's a pretty good image. Except on the new Silent Maid Peter's built, the mast is much bigger, and the sail is bigger too. I don't know how she can carry that much sail. Peter had us aboard last year on the new Maid, and we had a very light wind, but the boat moves in anything. Amazing vessel. Well, I'm delighted to hear from all of you. Really good.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for making the book possible. Could not have happened without you.
I don't know about that. All right.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mountford. If no one has any other questions, we can wrap it up if you like.
Thank you all. It's been a greater pleasure for me than you.
Enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Take care now.
Thanks again. Good night.
Good night.
Logging off and good night.